Assalamu alaikum, Jazakallah. So I think let's get the questions started. Jazakallah, very good talk about communities. What do you see, I think you mentioned a little bit about this, the spaces, the capital, the resources, which maps directly back to the Medina model. We need to create spaces for learning, for support, and capital and resource distribution, because I think something that you said was critical is talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And we've got to realize the situation we're in. We're not in Silicon Valley. So how do we bridge that gap? And I think you've, Naadiya, you've probably been on this journey for quite a while. Can you give us some insight on how we try to bridge that gap as a community, as a ummah?
And for me, I think we're sitting on a lot of capital. We just haven't asked people to invest in VC as an asset class or invest in entrepreneurs. And so I think as an ummah, we are very risk averse. I mean, I was speaking to even the guys in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, so in the Middle East, when we were trying to think about would you raise capital, would you invest in this business? People don't understand VC. They don't want to part with their money because they don't fundamentally understand it. And what sets Silicon Valley up, and that is that they've got a massive risk appetite, which we just don't have. And it takes, I think I've made $1,000 investments into very, very early stage businesses, people with ideas, and you don't get that. But in Silicon Valley, they're raising money on vibes. They just come with a good idea, and then people are throwing money at them. We don't have that. And so if you had a little bit of money set aside, could we also invest in people who are passionate, great ideas, great opportunity, and giving them that first $1,000 to be able to get them into their next 10, the 100, the million, the 10 million. And that's how you need to grow that entire pipeline. But it takes a step for us to be more risky.
Shukran. Huzaifa?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as you're speaking, Naadiya, one of the projects we do in Mamelodi is the Township Entrepreneurship Program, which is 4 to 12 weeks of teaching them how to use resources. And like you're saying, there are some resources where some VCs literally don't know what to do with their money. And then these kids literally, just a piece of that could change their lives. So for us, it's also about like coming up with very clever ideas. I was chatting to actually one of the financial services providers for Ashraful Aid, who was saying we actually need to, and it came back to earlier being dependent on other systems, is what if we created ways to finance these kids using the skill sets that we have? We all have to deploy Zakat, but could we find a way to create a Zakat model where you could pay instantly, kids could actually submit their ideas and you could transact? There's so many clever ways that we could potentially start pushing resources into these kids' hands, and it really, really could change their lives. $1,000, maybe nothing for Silicon Valley startup, but this kid would be that beacon of hope in their community to actually start driving funding in. I completely agree.
Thanks a lot. I think someone feels we shouldn't get bunnies for kids as well. So, yeah, shukran. So, I think the other besides capital, we've touched on this a bit before, inclusion and access, and maybe it's also related to education as well, because sometimes you're growing up in an environment where you don't have access to resources, you don't have access to capital. So even when you do have the opportunities, you may not believe you can. So how do we sort of bridge that gap and build the communities to support people, specifically from a personal level? Sometimes a famous entrepreneur, he mentioned that he just had one person backing him, which made him believe he was about to throw in the towel, but now he's a billionaire, right? So how do we bridge that gap and find the people who got the talent and then give them the resources, no matter, even if they don't have the connections and the opportunity?
And when I think about it, firstly, we don't ask enough of each other in a business way. So we'll get to this conference, we'll chat, and specifically even women, we're even worse at this because we'll talk about our kids, we'll talk about our families, we'll talk about rabbits, but we won't actually say, hey, I've got this business, I'm currently raising capital, can you connect me? And I think about one of my mentees. I was speaking at a panel and her mom messaged and said, you don't come home unless you ask Naadiya to be her mentor. And she came up to me and she's like, I'm really sorry to ask this, but like my mom won't let me into the house unless you become my mentor. And I was like, I felt really bad, so I was like, okay, cool. But it's been an incredible journey with her to actually, and she's in the tech space, and I've really pushed her. We should be able to do this because we don't have access to all this opportunity. So how do we, and I'm going to quote Aunt May from Spider-Man here, but with great power comes great responsibility. We've got incredible power here in the room, right? And we'll only be able to unlock doors at our corporates, because somebody, and I can tell you this personally, I landed all those deals and those contracts because somebody took a bet on me. And so we need to make sure that we continuously taking bets on people that don't have the backgrounds and they don't have the access into the spaces.
Absolutely. I think for me it's also about awareness. So when I've got a big passion for education. So for me it's also giving back, or giving charity isn't just a financial contribution, but it's teaching a kid something you know, and everyone's good at something. So if you're good at business, teach a business principle to a kid that's passionate about it. If you're good at baking, teach a kid how to bake and teach them how to bake it sustainable. But bridging that gap ultimately comes from awareness, showing them what's out there and that the world is much bigger than that community that they're in, and education, showing them how to leverage some of the resources that are freely available. Just the NYDA alone has allocated 250,000 Rand per child in South Africa under 35 years old. Most people didn't know that. I didn't know that until last year. So there's resources, but the kids don't know that those resources exist. And showing them, by giving them that awareness, could actually start unlocking their potential.
Thanks a lot.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Related to that question, this question from the audience is like, how do we build a fund to end poverty in our country? Because we've got to understand we're living in a very different socio-economic status in South Africa, related to the question of building the mines and stuff, but specifically around funding, and how can we replicate that globally?
Okay, I definitely don't come from a finance background, but I think it's just maybe creating, we have fintech specialists in the room as well, creating a community or system first to be able to allow you to put money in, and then essentially creating a very clever validation system. So for our township entrepreneurship program, the real success is in the metrics and how those kids are performing with the data that we're giving them. So are they able to show traction, as an example? So how many kids or how many other community members could they sell to is a very strong indicator of whether they're going to do well or not, but then codifying those mechanisms for success and putting it into a system that allows them to then either access the funding almost like maybe a banking app, but using AI and all the great tools that are available to be able to pre-qualify these kids and have a human input to be able to then approve those transactions could be maybe a clever way to do this. But I definitely am not the expert in the room. I think it takes a little bit of time with some very smart people to be able to build a fund like that. I'm sure there's proper metrics to put in.
Yeah, and look, there's loads of funds. There's a 300 million Rand jobs fund. The government has put funds and investment vehicles, but we just don't know about it. So I think there's around awareness around what's out there. If I had a magic wand today, what I would love to set up is an angel syndicate for Ummah tech, right? So that for the developers in the room, the tinkerers who actually want to, and we all put some money into the angel syndicate, and it becomes an evergreen fund, so it rolls along, and you come with an investment thesis when we have an ad hoc investment committee, and we start to invest, right? And then in 10 years' time, we say, wow, look at all the investments we made.
Bismillah, let's do it.
Ready to go. I think it's a great idea.
Well, I'm outside collecting $1,000 checks if you're looking for me.
So that maybe follows up the next question is, just to finish off, you running a fund, what do you look for when you're funding? So entrepreneurs in this audience, at different stages you may need different things. So you've got early stage, late stage, maybe just 2 minutes, what do you look for and what stage, and what are the indicators that entrepreneurs need to make sure that they're nailing to raise that funding?
Sure. So 535 Ventures is a seed stage fund, so you must be showing some revenue, some traction, must be tech-enabled, must be female-focused, so there must be a female founder, co-founder, so it can be a mixed team, but at least one woman involved. Female management or female consumer base is the gender lens requirements, And then, it's a dollar fund, so we'll invest in dollars, and we're really looking for entrepreneurs that have really great ideas, but actually there's a market opportunity and we can see the growth. But that's at seed. What I really am passionate about is pre-seed. How do we actually get the ideas out there? And that's angel. And we always say you back the jockey before the horse in pre-seed. And that we need people who, if you've got a really great idea and you can see a market opportunity and some grit from the entrepreneur, that's who you're going to give the check to. And unfortunately, investors give money to people they know, like, and trust. And if they don't know you, they don't like you, they don't trust you, and you don't look like them, you're not going to get the check. So if they're not giving us those early checks, we have to create those checks ourselves.
I sit on the other side of the table from Naadiya, and that we're the ones that talk to the VCs and ask them for money. So our most recent round was a Series A of $1 million, which was scary because we actually got to understand how they think. And so the fundamentals, or at least from my perspective, were how big is the problem you're solving? Do you have a viable solution that you can scale effectively at a low cost? And how big is your market? If you've got a very big market that's able to pay even a little bit of money and you're solving a real problem, it becomes a very attractive deal, not just for VCs, but for any investor.
Thanks a lot. I think that's useful advice for the audience. Jazakallah.